Yeah, this is Yering Gorge, Yarra River. I think you're looking at a yellow box there. Pretty hard place to walk into. Yering Gorge, sort of northwest of Lilydale. Why I'm interested in this spot is this is where water is pumped from the Yarra River at this location here, and it ends up as drinking water for about 1.5 million people in the northern and western suburbs of Melbourne. It's been operating this pump since about the pump house since about the early 1980s. The water is pumped up this hillside. You can't see it, but I'll try and give you an idea. And then over that ridge line is Sugarloaf Reservoir, which is about 96 gigalitres of storage capacity. So whatever's in the source water here will end up in the reservoir as well, Sugarloaf, and in the water treatment plant at Winneke will then hopefully treat out whatever is in the water. So the Winneke would be set up. It's a classic water treatment facility in that its sort of main purpose is to take out bacterial contamination and a lot of suspended solids and highly turbid quality water. But it wasn't designed to take out pesticides. What they do at Winneke, they run it through the water treatment plant, and it's run through sand filters. I think there's about 14 sand filters, and each of those filters can filter about 40 million litres of water a day. So under FOI and a few other a bit of research, I've found there's been about a dozen pesticides located in the Yarra River at this location, where it's been sampled for. Some of them well known. Glyphosate, one of the highest levels of glyphosate in Victoria, 0.5 parts per billion. Atrazine at about 0.1, and simazine. Simazine is the most frequently detected pesticide. It's a herbicide. So this area drains the upper Yarra catchment. There would be thousands and thousands of hectares of farmland. So all the farms, from Gembrook, all the cut flower industry at Lilydale, at Sylvan, etc., orchards, all that, any contaminant that runs off the sites, the farms, will end up in the Yarra, and then depending on flows and whatever, a diluted amount of chemical will end up where it's pumped from this pump station into Sugarloaf. So 1 part per billion doesn't sound like much. It's one drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Doesn't sound like much, but in Europe, the safe drinking water guidelines in Europe state that 0.1 part per billion of a chemical requires that, if it's detected, requires the water authority to then investigate where the pollution's coming from and work on strategies to try and stop it at its source. And a combination of pesticides has to amount to 0.5 parts per billion for this similar action to take place in Europe. In Australia, we don't run under the precautionary principle. We run under what they call a risk assessment, and the standards for pesticides are much higher. For instance, it's not 0.1 part for glyphosate in Australia, it's 1 part per million, which is 10,000 times higher than what would be acceptable in Europe under the guideline. For simazine, it's 20 parts per billion, which is about 200 times higher than what would be acceptable in Europe. So there's been a whole concoction of pesticides, I think about a dozen, with simazine the most frequently detected. There's also been drugs, anti-anxiety drugs and anti-epilepsy drugs, all sorts of of chemicals that have come out of the wastewater treatment plant that's upstream at Lilydale. There's a few upstream, and we've also heard PFAS, which is known as the forever chemical, has been also detected in the Yarra, and that's a worry because pesticides is parts per billion safe levels. With PFAS it's parts per trillion, 1,000 times lower. So the other problem with PFAS is if it's in the water supply, how do you actually filter it out? And that'll be coming in from the water treatment plants upstream as well. The water treatment plants are a major source of PFAS in the environment. But anyway, I thought if people don't know where their drinking water comes from and you're in Melbourne, it's not all closed catchments. This is sort of proof that the water you're drinking in the northern and western suburbs is coming directly out of the Yarra, and has been since about the 1980s. Stringent testing for pesticides and other substances like that didn't really occur big time until about 10 years ago. Prior to that, they were more interested in the organochlorines, and they only tested for a handful of chemicals. We estimate possibly up to 400 different pesticides will be used in the catchments. You've also got issues with heavy metals. One would be mercury, which, from the old gold mining days up in the Yarra catchment. But it's an interesting spot, Yering Gorge. It's one of the major choke points on the Yarra. There's about 3 where the water backs up in flood events. So Yering Gorge is one. Then you've also got the Bend of Islands, and there's another choke point near the Chandler Highway. So in big high rainfall events, the water can't get through the gorges, so it backs up and floods over the floodplains, which makes those floodplain development areas really important, and then a lot of them have been targeted for development at this stage. So there you go, Melbourne water and drinking water. That's something you mightn't have known about.